In higher ed, we're all looking for big wins, but reducing a 75% application abandonment rate and achieving a 90% conversion rate, that's next level transformation. Michael Bettersworth, CMO at Texas State Technical College, shares how they achieved this by streamlining the application process with Element 451.
Our Element journey began out of a necessity. We were switching to a new SIS, and the application process was going to pose some real usability issues for us. We felt that application was going to hamper our enrollment. So we began quickly to evaluate different CRMs, different applications. So for context on that, our conversion rate with the prior application had about 75% abandonment of people clicking apply to submit. And the first weeks after going live with Element, we saw an 80% conversion, and that's now up to 90. So improving the usability of that application on the front end process has had a significant advance in our intake.
When technology works for students, it works for you. Visit element451.com to see how simplifying the application process with artificial intelligence will lead to significant results for your institution.
I remember walking into that room and it was very uneasy. And they were brutally honest with me about, how I could change and how I could be a better leader. Encouraged me to think about that pressure that I was putting on the staff and whatnot. And at first I was embarrassed. I was ashamed. And I think, many of us have probably had those moments. And I think it would have been really easy for me to walk out of there and just been like, not care about it or be frustrated with the team. But instead, I viewed it as my team trusted me enough and believed in the culture that we were building that I could take a lot from that.
Welcome to Mission of Missions. I'm your host, Jeremy Tiers. This is the show designed to help you grow, both professionally and personally, in the fast-paced world of higher education. Every other Tuesday, I sit down with senior leaders, new professionals, and difference makers from across higher ed and beyond, where we'll share tips and strategies related to challenging topics like student recruitment, leadership, customer service, enrollment marketing, and time management. So if you're looking for practical advice and conversations that actually move the needle, this show's for you. Grab your notepad or fire up your notes app, and let's get into it. Hey everybody, it's Jeremy Tiers, and this is episode 68 of the Mission Admissions podcast. How well do you know yourself, your strengths, your weaknesses, and your limitations? Psychologists and researchers have discovered that while 95% of people claim to be self-aware, about only 10 to 15% of us are truly self-aware. Prioritizing self-reflection and becoming more self-aware has been a game changer for my guest today, Conner Ellinghuysen. So welcome to the show, Conner.
Thanks, Jeremy, for having me.
So Conner, I'd be curious to know, why do you think a lot of people struggle to evaluate themselves accurately? What is it that prevents that from happening?
Yeah, Jeremy, I think a lot of folks are scared to look in the mirror, not because maybe they're in vain, but because they're afraid of what they might see. It takes a lot of courage to admit you're not perfect, right? And even more to work on it. As the director of admissions, I'm also the head archery coach here at Buena Vista University. And I have a long history and background with 4-H as well. So in 4-H, we learn to make the best better, but you can't do that if you're not being honest about, where you're starting. I think that sometimes folks think that reflection means beating yourself up, but really it's just giving yourself the feedback that you'd offer a teammate that you believe in too. And then I think when we think about it in higher education too, I think most people are so focused on doing rather than pausing to think about how or why they're doing something. It's easy to get caught up in a goal or a task at hand. And we tend to grind through moments, right? Teachable moments in order to, well, at least we hope to stay the course. Doesn't always work that way though, right?
Well, and what you and I know, right, is so many people, especially if you're in a position of leadership listening, like, Conner is, we do all of this work with data throughout the year, right? We're looking at all these different data sets, and yet when it comes to, we'll call it our personal data, aka taking self inventory, it's like we just kind of pass that off. But I do think, to your point, Connor, the biggest thing that I hear from people when I float ask them, hey, what are you doing from a self reflection or like self evaluation standpoint is absolutely. It just drills down to like, I don't like admitting that I'm making mistakes, or, okay, I know I'm making mistakes, but then I don't really know what do I do with those mistakes to improve them. And oh my God, if I admit them, what are people going to think about me and so on and so forth. But my feedback always to that person, Connor, is listen, I don't know a single human. I dare you to find somebody in this world who hasn't made mistakes along the way to growth. Like
Hmm.
we're human. It's the way we were created. So mistakes 100% are inevitable. I would argue, as we'll talk about today, right? It's how do you identify them and what do you do, obviously, to fix them, right?
Yeah. And I think too that oftentimes in leadership roles, it's easy to be surrounded by yes people, right? Maybe you don't always hire yes people, but sometimes it's inevitable as you're grinding out, trying to reach goals and whatnot, that your staff will just kind of go with the flow of what you're trying to do. So it makes it a little bit harder to get objective feedback unless you really are intentional and you're seeking it. And, going back to that 4-H piece too, it really taught me early on that evaluation and that self-awareness isn't a sign of failure. It's a key to improvement. So I try and apply that same mindset, whether it's, as a director or a coach, when I am reviewing anything that we're doing. But I've seen, unless that you've had that modeled or trained, or had mentors that have guided you, it's really easy to skip those moments. And it's really easy to not ask. You just kind of keep going.
So how often then, because this is where my brain goes next, do you intentionally do this now? I mean, obviously you're a little farther along in your journey, and so I don't know if it's changed over time, but I'd be curious, and I'm sure the audience would too, Connor, to know, like, are you doing self-reflection and personal evaluation daily, weekly, monthly? And like, help us understand as well, has it changed as you've moved into a leadership role, or has it been pretty consistent in terms of a frequency standpoint?
I think it ebbs and flows depending on the season, honestly. So if, I'm thinking kind of in the terms of higher education at this point. And honestly, as I was thinking about this, it kind of reminds me of a garden, if you will, and gardening. Some seasons you're planting, some you're weeding, and some you're harvesting, right? So for me, the planting season is kind of that summer and fall when we're building relationships, we're working applications, trying to get students interested, and really, if you will, planting the seeds of our college experience and what that's going to be like. So during that time, self reflection often happens daily, because I'm always wondering, you know, how am I doing as a leader? Am I helping the team get through the hectic season? Or what are some strategies that we can do to keep us on track? Then it's the weeding season, if you will. And I think for us in higher ed, a lot of it is cutting through the noise, right? You get a ton of applications, and we as leaders and admission counselors and whatnot, we're trying to figure out who's actually interested, in attending our school. And as we're trying to sort through all of that, I think reflection now often is, did we do enough, right? And if we didn't do enough, what do we need to do to get back on the right track? And also, have we, essentially built a culture that we're prepared to grind out the rest of the season? Because then it leads to that harvest or that yield season, if you will. And for me, I think reflection still remains daily, but there's also more frequent weekly check-ins, just to make sure that we're keeping morale up, we're preparing for that final push. I'm thinking a lot about myself in that, am I projecting, what I hope my team will find fruitful and helpful for them versus, put more pressure and more stress on them. So I think, in other words, you can think about it that during heavy recruiting or these competitive periods, if you will, I try and do quick weekly or daily check-ins. And then really in that slower periods, I carve out a little bit more time that's a lot more, what I'd say, deep reflection, where I'm really thinking through kind of each of these processes and each of kind of the emotions that go into this too, and thinking through, how can I try and get 1% better for all of these smaller things going on.
So And go with this whichever way you want, Connor, but like drill down for the audience. What does that process look like for you? Are you doing it in your office? Are you doing it at home? Are you doing it in multiple places? Do you have a notepad? Do you have your computer? Is there a certain list of questions you write down ahead of it? Like, help the audience understand if they're like, I know I need to do this, but I really don't have a process. Here's what your process looks like that you found works for you.
I think you got to keep it simple. So maybe it is a notebook for me. I use my notes tab a lot on my phone. Maybe it's just going for a walk. And sometimes that means that as I'm walking, I'm either emailing myself or putting some notes down as I'm reflecting. I do really find that sending myself an email or jotting something down to on a post-it note, I don't know, there's some kind of freeing moment there just to get my thoughts out of my head a little bit, and it also gives me something to accomplish. I think people that are directors and leaders and whatnot would agree. We get a lot of emails, so when we can delete some emails, that's definitely super helpful. So I think there's something to that. That I'll even send myself some emails. But yeah, I'll be out on a walk or on the range, replaying moments that are in my head of how the day went. And then other times I'm just jotting down thoughts, or emailing myself before bed as I reflect about the day as well. I find that if I don't spend some time reflecting on my day right before bed, my mind is racing because I'm thinking through a lot of different things. So I got to get it out. And I'm also worried I'm going to forget it in the morning. So but things that I'm really asking myself is, did I make someone feel seen today? Did I lead with purpose or just kept things moving along? What worked? Why did it work? What felt off? How did I respond to a situation? How did my actions align with my values? That's something that is really important to me. What's one thing that I'd do different if I had the day over again, if I could redo that day? Something for me too is I am goal driven and process driven. So for me, I really do ask myself, do I feel like I accomplished some goals and, what I set out for the day? But again, I just want to reiterate that I don't think reflection needs to be fancy. I think it just needs to be honest. And I want to go back to one of the earlier questions you were asking about, because there's a moment that really led me down this path. And honestly, one of the hardest days of my career, I think, turned out to be one of the greatest game-changing moments of my life at the same time. Early in my career here as a director after COVID, we had we were bringing back events, and as a young director, I felt the pressure of trying to make sure that we're creating the best visit experience possible and making sure that when our visitors leave, they had a great impression of BV. And I think we've all been there, right? There's a lot that can go wrong on visit days, and you just want to make sure that your team is doing everything they can to have those successful visit days. And there were things that made me stressed out or annoyed, and I just constantly talked with the team about how can we improve this, and what I didn't realize in the moment, that there was unnecessary stress and pressure that was being put on the team for that too. And a few days after one of our events, my assistant director came into my office and asked me to come out to a meeting with the staff in the big visit room. And I remember walking into that room, and it was very uneasy. And they were brutally honest with me about, how I could change and how I could be a better leader, encouraged me to think about that pressure that I was putting on the staff and whatnot. And at first I was embarrassed, I was ashamed. And I think, many of us have probably had those moments. And I think it would have been really easy for me to walk out of there and just been like, not care about it or be frustrated with the team. But instead I viewed it as my team trusted me enough and believed in the culture that we were building, that I could take a lot from that. And that has really helped me to take time to remember, my days in 4-H and the self-reflection, to really try and pause in those moments and to do some self-reflection before actually communicating or thinking through those emotions a little bit. So that is part of the reason why I think self-awareness and this reflection is so important.
Yeah, and I appreciate you sharing that. And I do feel like we all kind of have those moments, right, where it just something happens, good, bad, indifferent, and it just makes us go, okay, yeah, that's why I need to do like, more of this, or that's why I need to start doing this if I'm not doing it. And it does make me wonder again, just think back to your early days when you started in your director role, Connor, or any leadership role, and you were managing staff, how often and did you do it at the start in terms of explaining to your team, hey, like, this is something I want all of you to do because I do it. We're going to talk about it. Like, have you been intentional about encouraging the staff, not just in, say, quarterly or year end meetings, right? When you meet with them one on one, but like, have you kind of made it a point to say, hey, like, I want you all to do this because it's going to help you? And like, you kind of walk them through kind of what we're talking about today, or has that not really been a talking point?
Absolutely, it's been a topic, and even just conflict management in general. We've had those conversations that we're not always going to agree, and when you're sitting there in a meeting or we're going over a process or something, and maybe you don't agree, odds are we're kind of reflecting in our mind at that time, right? We're reflecting and we're thinking about, I don't think this is a good idea because X, Y, and Z. So we've encouraged it from the get-go that let's have those tough conversations as a team. Let's just try and build that trust and that relationship with each other to be able to feel confident that we can share it. And people may get frustrated, but it's a frustration of trying to understand, because we all have that same goal in mind of building a strong culture and trying to hit our goals ultimately. And I think that's been something that was really important to me, is wanting to make sure that the staff knew that they could have the ability to share their thoughts, but then also take time for them to reflect themselves, to ask the questions that I ask myself. Are they making a difference? Are they putting the effort in? What can they do better? Because we all have to have those hard conversations with ourselves, and that self-awareness, because if we're not, how are we truly improving and growing every single day?
Yeah. AI powered and people focused. This is the future of higher ed. Join us in Charlotte, June 24th and 25th for the 2025 Engage Summit. Learn how AI transforms student engagement by blending scalability with authenticity. Enrollify listeners get $50 off registration with the code Enrollify50. Register now at engage.element451.com. Couple things there. I love that you intentionally prioritize it number one with your team. I get asked all the time by leaders, right? When I'm on a campus, whether it's doing training or some type of consulting work, Jeremy, how can I get my team to kind of like be more proactive and to, really continue to like take ownership, we'll say, of their personal growth? And I'm like, well, how much do you talk about it?
Hmm.
Like legitimately sit down as a team and or individually with them and actually talk about how to do it, why it's important. And, same thing with how do I get my staff, Jeremy, to like not be worried about making mistakes? I'm like, do you talk about them with that? And they're kind of looking at me like, what do you mean do I talk about it? I'm like, do you literally sit them down as a group? Just like, if you're listening to this, Connor explained he's done with his team and said, listen, I want you to try things. I want you to try to figure out how can we support students and family better in this process. And guess what? You're probably going to make some mistakes in the process of doing that. The key is evaluating, well, why did we make a mistake? And how do we change it so that maybe next time we don't? And I feel like if you don't, as a leader, have that type of dialogue with your staff, it just becomes so hard to expect your staff then to have the confidence to say, cool, I can do what your team clearly did with you back when you were a young leader, where they kind of said, hey, Connor, like, we need this from you and we're not getting it right now. And if we're going to get better, like, we want you to know this, right?
Yeah. And honestly, I know I'm not perfect. I understand, as a leader, as a coach, I'm the one that's setting the tone a lot of times, right? If I come in frustrated or distracted, the whole vibe can really shift, right? But when I show up calm, prepared, focused on others, things obviously go better. So I think being self-aware isn't just about you. And I think that's really important. It's about being the kind of leader that people deserve.
Yeah. And it really is, as a leader, just because of, again, I'll state the obvious to those listeners, but like your team takes on the identity of you
Yeah.
as a leader. I mean, it's just read as many books as you want. The data's all out there from psychologists and researchers, right? And so when your team sees you prioritizing certain things or talking about why something's important, it's going to land a little bit differently. But on that same note, Connor, I feel like we all need people, I'll say. Sometimes it's people we work with, maybe not directly in our department, but a colleague in another department, or we need a spouse or significant other, friends, parents, whoever it is, to be able to help us become more self-aware, to be able to listen, to be able to just help with this growth process and self-reflection. So like, do you involve other people frequently, or have you in the past when it comes to reflection and self-evaluation? And like, how does that, look for you?
Absolutely. I've got this circle of folks who aren't afraid to call me out. So they'll call me in instead of out all the time. So whether it's my admissions team, it could be another coach, or even some of my athletes, or student workers, I ask feedback from them quite regularly. Sometimes I think they might get annoyed how many times I ask for feedback or for reflection. But again, going back to just my past of mentors and 4-H leaders, we've had those people in my life that were willing to give it to me straight, but with kindness at the same time. And I think that's a sweet spot. It keeps you grounded and it keeps you growing. For me, I think what I am aware of is that you need people to tell you the truth, not just what you want to hear. Because if, again, going back to what I was saying earlier, if you just have yes people, it's really hard to gauge. You can make assumptions of how it's doing. I sometimes have a tendency to overthink sometimes. And I got to go to those people, that circle, to say, am I overthinking this or is this actually going on? And they'll be like, oh, no, you're overthinking it. Or sometimes they're like, oh, we didn't think about that. Yeah, that's a problem. So I think you just need them to be able to tell you that truth. And as I'm asking people to reflect, I'm also reflecting alongside them. So, one example is for our archery practices. At the end of an archery practice, we go around and we talk about what worked today. What do we need to improve on next time? But I'm always asking them kind of the reflection question of the day. And that can be about archery. It can be about life. For me, I really treat archery as kind of the vessel to a lot of life skills that we're trying to build within our team. And I've very much view that the same, working with my admissions team is I want to ask those thought-provoking questions that get us to think and work alongside them, because when you hear somebody else reflecting, it gives you some feedback that maybe you haven't thought of as well. So that two-way feedback really builds trust and accountability within our team. And what I'm really trying to do, especially with all of the teams, especially the admissions team, is I really do want to have a culture where feedback isn't feared, rather it's invited, because I always think there's an opportunity for us to improve.
Yeah. And I mean, it does require a level, I would argue, of humility and a level of being vulnerable. And those aren't easy for a lot of us. I'm well aware, like, those are skills that some of us really struggle with and are not, but again, there's no better time than the present. We've never had more people who talk openly about those subjects. There's more books on those subjects like than ever before. So I feel like, the biggest thing that so many people need to do is just to give themselves permission to like say, yep, I suck at this.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, 100%. And for me, I know I'm not alone when I say this. There's many of us leaders in the higher ed space that, when we're working with young professionals, especially admission counselors starting off, we probably encourage them to be vulnerable with their students, right? You know, if we've went to college or had a similar experience, it's really powerful when you're vulnerable and you share your thoughts of, how they got through that collegiate experience and got through the college search process, and maybe shared that, hey, I was a first gen student too, or we struggled with finances too. And when you are vulnerable, you gain a certain level of trust with the students and the families that you serve. And same goes with your coworkers and your employees when you're vulnerable.
So pick one or two, because I'm sure there's more than one or two, Connor, but give us one or two things or skills that just your process of becoming more self-aware and doing all this reflection has really led you to improve significantly over the last few years.
Well, I just think, honestly, self awareness just has made me a better director, a better coach, a better listener, and honestly, just a better human being in general. I'm still working and at catching myself before reacting at times, but I'm also trying to, lead with curiosity. I think that's so important. What is the potential? What if we try this? What can be accomplished with that? And honestly, one of the greatest things that I've ever learned was from one of my mentors is just to stop thinking sometimes that I need the answers to everything. And again, once you learn that, I think it is just so freeing because you can learn so much. And it goes back to that curiosity piece. I've learned so much just by remaining curious and learning from others and also taking ideas from other industries too. I think also it's made me braver. The self-awareness piece has, because it gives me clarity to act. And also, even when it's uncomfortable situations, sometimes we're taking that leap of faith. And the self-awareness piece has just made me think through that it's okay to be vulnerable and be brave and try it. And it also has just really allowed me to say, ooh, that wasn't the right move there. How can we go back and make that situation a little bit better? And again, I think it's just helped me be a better coach and a better leader. I can spot when somebody needs maybe a more technical or a process oriented correction versus when sometimes it's just a mindset and it's more of that emotional support that they need. So now I've learned how to kind of model that awareness, and I'm not afraid to ask the questions. And sometimes I think when we think about self-awareness, we often forget that we have to have self-awareness of how much we push our staff and our team and how much we ask the questions too a little bit. So for me, it's given me the opportunity just to know how, hard I should push and encourage them too, and kind of when to back off a little bit too.
So much good stuff there. And I think it's going to be a ton of good takeaways for the audience. And so I really appreciate you just feeling comfortable to share a lot of those personal anecdotes and such, Conner. The last thing I do on every episode is this thing called Fun Rapid Fire. So I'm just going to give you a handful of random questions, and I want to get some quick feedback from you.
All right, sounds good.
All right. So Conner shared he's the archery coach at BV. Have any of your players ever beaten you?
Yes, they have. Yep, I've been put to shame a couple of times. So yes.
As a former college basketball coach, I can tell you I lost many a game of horse pig and a whole bunch of other names. Best Star Wars movie, because I know you're a Star Wars fan.
Ooh, maybe our unpopular opinion, Rogue One is my favorite. Great movie.
Not a very big Star Wars fan, so I have no comment or horse in the race. Superpower you would like to have, Conner, if you could have one?
Oh, wow. Teleportation, maybe, just to get someplace faster. That would be helpful.
Convenience is important. Last book you read, what is it?
The Power of Moments. And right now we're reading Atomic Habits. And then I'm also listening to a book right now called Unreasonable Hospitality. And Atomic Habits and Unreasonable Hospitality, bringing a lot of different experiences and whatnot from outside of admissions. That's been really valuable.
Last one. All right, Conner, rumor is you've milked a few cows in your lifetime. All right. What's the hardest part of milking a cow?
Oh, man. Getting the cows to cooperate. So you did a deep dive there on that. So, yep. Getting them to cooperate. They don't always like to, do what you're hoping that they're going to do. So I have many horror stories of uncooperative cows at that time. So.
Yes, Conner lives in the Midwest, for anybody who was wondering the entire show. So,
yeah. And if
Conner,
you can pick up on my accent, I am from Minnesota originally. So,
well, I appreciate you being on, and it's always fun to just watch friends grow in their leadership journey. And on the way out the door, I'll tell the audience I've known Conner for years, and it is just fun to see him grow as a leader. And I asked him to be on because of how much I feel like he's, really grown in the area of self-reflection. And so, Conner, I just appreciate you being willing, to share a lot of the things that have worked for you with the audience today.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And I appreciate the friendship. It's been great and definitely has helped me come a long ways as well.
You're welcome. And I appreciate everybody listening and look forward to the next time we connect. Thanks for listening to Mission Admissions. This show is a proud member of the Enrollify Network, home to Higher Ed's largest collection of podcasts. Enrollify is where higher ed goes to grow, so be sure to check out our other podcasts, webinars, video clips, blogs, and more. Visit enrollify.org and subscribe for all the latest details and content drops directly to your inbox. Enrollify is brought to you by Element 451, the digital workforce platform for higher ed. Learn more at element451.com.